Hey guys, this is Loman02. I'm going to quickly review the deck that I played to victory in CSM or Chainsaw Massacre Hunter Card Singleton / Highlander event, 4.15. So this deck is a blue-white Azorius splash black control deck, combo control deck. So the way it wins is it wins either through Elsbeth and Gideon for attritional value, Batterskull plus Stoneforge Mystic. Or it has two combo wins. So Helm of Obedience, Rest in Peace, and then Entreat the Angels, which combines fairly well with cards like Brainstorm, with cards like Personal Tutor, and with cards like Mystical Tutor. Where are you at, buddy? There you are. So that's how the deck wins. There are ways to tutor the Helm combo, and there are several ways to combo into the Entreat the Angels. A couple things that are missing from this deck, and it's kind of meta-specific. Mystical Teachings is not in this deck of note. In a more controlling atmosphere, I think it would be, because it enables me to get after either one of the two combos by finding Enlightened Tutor or Mystical Tutor with that card. So the deck is extremely controlling. As you can tell, there's a lot of blue cards in it. One of the recent adds that I would like to make mention of now before we go into the match play is Search for Escanta. I was a little dubious of this card in the meta because the meta is very aggressive, but this card more than showed its worth. I stopped cutting it in any given matchup because it's just that good. It's ramp in the mid game, and in the late game it just locks out opponents very hard unless they're able to deal with it through like a Wasteland or something like that. So that's the deck. Best card draw, best counters, a lot of 2-for-1 type counters like Mystical Confluence, like Dismiss, which is essentially a older and more mild version of Cryptic Command, but it does the most typical version of Cryptic Command, which is counter draw. And you have cards like Exclude and Complicate. Exclude, a little weaker, a little more specific, but when you get to pay 3 mana for essentially, a Dismiss, that's pretty good. You look at the board over here. The board is highly meted against aggressive decks. So these 10 cards right here, some of them are multimodal, but they all stop red deck wins. That's pretty much the only bad matchup for this deck. Everything else, I think, is close to 50-50. Some of these cards, like I said, are multimodal, though. Like you can put Spellskite in different decks if there's equipment-heavy decks. Flash Freeze is an anti-green card as well, which you can put with Perish over here. Bribery, anti-green. Back to basics, really just 4-color decks. 4-color Shift, 4-color Blood, just good against the greedy mana bases. Toxic Deluge, multimodal, but typically speaking, it's going to be good against green or against white. Virtue's Ruin, pretty obvious, just an obvious hoser against white. When you're playing against white, Timely Reinforcements also tends to come in. But like I said, the sideboard is heavily meted to beat that which we think we're going to have a tough time with, which I think this deck is, generally speaking, going to have a tough time against red deck wins. So, that is the deck. It's a deck that I've played pretty often before. Not a ton of adds to it or changes, maybe a few in the board. But I'll go through the matches now. So our first game was against player Jack Schlegel. He's playing a blue-red Moon deck. The Moon part of it I don't really mind, but I know he probably has Kiki Cheeky and Pestermite combos in here, stuff like that. Maybe Zealous Conscripts. So this hand's a little dubious, only a 2-lander, but it has 2 counter spells that are castable given the mana I have. The worst thing for me to see would be Wasteland here. I fortunately do not see it. Spell Pierce, not an optimal draw, but also not horrendous because once we start getting to, if we get another blue mana, then we can hold up 2 counters in 1 turn, which we made the first time just to play around Daze or something like that. Depends on how much mana the opponent has open. So we missed this next turn, but I do cast this out. My thinking is the opponent doesn't really hit that hard on 3. What I'm worried about is turn 4. I don't want my opponent to get to turn 4 and me have my mana tap down because turn 4 is Planeswalker time, like Chandra's, like Jace's, etc. So, go to draw this time. Believe I hit a Plains. Very happy with that. I do want to stay at mana parity with my opponent. I would have preferred it to be a blue source, but beggars can't be choosers. At this point, we have Mana Leak and Spell Pierce up, or just Counterspell, or Absorb. I believe they do nothing this turn, and they have plans to cast a Fact or Fiction on my end step. Back to my turn, I believe I draw Wasteland for the turn. If I mess some of this up, I'm sorry. There's a few games I've played today. So transition back into the opponent's turn. I believe they pass it again and do nothing. No, that's correct. Yeah, Factor Fiction here and then into Planeswalker. So they Factor Fiction. We just Spell Pierce it, leaving up the Mana Leak. They go for, I believe, a Chandra here. No, Champion of Wits. Okay, my memory's bad of this. Champion of Wits. I counter this. I know it's not a great thing to counter, but I don't really want them to get early pressure on the board when I really can't deal with it. I could Oblivion Ring it and then leave up, Counterspell, but that feels kind of weak to me. I'd prefer to save the Oblivion Ring for, like, a Planeswalker threat. Here's the first Planeswalker. I believe we just go for an Absorb here because it's the least mana efficient, and when I start casting the Oblivion Ring, I'd like to have Counterspell up the same turn I do it. Do not fetch here. Doesn't make sense to. Draw to a Ponder. Go ahead and Ponder here, looking for land drops. See Brainstorm as well, which is very strong with the Flooded Strand. Play out my land and then pass it back. I can't help but shake my head that my opponents played the Is It Boilerworks into my Wasteland. I know it takes me off mana for use of my Elsbeth. However, I feel like it's pretty big upside to take away 2 land drops. It's a huge tempo loss for my opponent. And the control matchup tends to always be about, making land drops on time every time. We were initially behind. Now that we've gotten to the mid to late game, we've jumped back ahead. I think we probably run more lands than our opponent does. Draw to the island that we knew was on top from the Brainstorm. I'm not going to try to slam an Elsbeth into 4 open mana. That just seems like folly to me. I'll wait for my opponent to act. They go ahead and Is It Charm, and I believe anticipate after Is It Charming on my end step. I tend to be okay with this. I know they probably don't want to cast these on their turn, but they're losing a lot of value off the Storm Chaser Mage. If I'm just going to get plinked for 1 by Storm Chaser Mage every time, I tend to be A-okay with that. I go for the activation here. It's not very hard for my opponent to get the Storm Chaser Mage out of kill range for my Celestial Colonnade. However, it is fairly difficult for them to get it to a point where it can kill my Celestial Colonnade without the use of 2 cards to do so. So, Storm Chaser Mage down. They wanted to Kefnet's last word this. I counterspell it quite easily. I figure I might as well because I'm going to tap out next turn anyways. Unless I draw an untapped land, I'm not going to have 2 blue mana open to leave Counterspell up. So I'd like to keep my land here. Go ahead and play Elsbeth, playing around Daze. Then I go ahead and Preordain. I actually do keep the land. Draw to Factor Fiction here. I go ahead and Factor Fiction. Keep the Dig Through Time pile with 1 island. Play out islands, and then cast Oblivion Ring. There's a lot of spells in my opponent's graveyard. I'd prefer not to allow them to dig through their library and try to find an answer to this. I figure their 3 cards are probably not that great, and or they just cannot tango with Elsbeth. Do not attack here in fear of a possible haste creature. Most of their haste creatures are probably going to have flying, but I'm going to try to play around any ground-based haste creature they may have, because if I do 3 here, it puts them to 11. The only thing that doing that does is shuts off Barbarian Ring a turn sooner, but they're already on a crap ton of mana. I go for Dig Through Time here, figuring it's probably going to get countered, which is fine by me because at this point I've acquired board dominance, and if my opponent is doing nothing but countering my spells and tapping down to counter my spells, they're going to lose the game because they're not interacting in a impactful enough way. They get some value off of Complicate, which is kind of a beating, but at the same time, I'm going to put them to 4 this turn with Celestial Colonnade plus the 6 1/1s. So we get in there for a 10-point life swing, putting them to 4. They draw for the turn, and I believe concede. Yep. So, game 2. Game 2, very keepable hand. I have Stoneforge Mystic, which means I ideally do not have to draw Batterskull unless I draw it on my first or second turn. Draw Sphinx's Rev, not a great pull there. I do keep this because I see Delver of Secrets, and I know I have Engineered Explosives on top of my deck. So, Sea of Volcanic Island and Young Pyromancer. So the board is getting clogged up pretty rapidly. I figure Stoneforge Mystic is going to incite some sort of burn spell to its face. But at a minimum, I won't have to draw the Batterskull again. And next turn, I can play out the Engineered Explosives. Lightning Bolt makes sense. And Grim Lavamancer. I'm actually happy to see that because that means the Engineered Explosives is going to do something here. I do fetch. I don't want the last card on top of my deck. I believe get a basic island here. Cast the Engineered Explosives out. Now, here's my plan. I figure this will incite an attack And I intend on casting the Snapcaster Mage for no value, just to block the Young Pyromancer. Opponent's on 2 cards, so they could have a counterspell, and that would be bad, but I figure it's the highest upside play. I'm already enough behind that I think this is worth doing. And if it trades with the Young Pyromancer, then I'm in a very good place because I can remove their 2 other relevant threats. And they're left with a 1/1 and a Mishra's Factory, which is fairly mana inefficient and precludes playing of other things. I go ahead and play out the Wasteland here to kind of scare off their Mishra's Factory. I'm trying to remember if they go for it or not. No, they play a Tamiyo this turn, which is a huge beating. So they drew the land they needed, play Tamiyo out, and now we're in trouble. And actually, we misplayed pretty significantly coming up here, although that was just a bad draw. Rest in Peace and Helm of Obedience are just such dead draws when you're not ahead in the game. Like, you really don't want them. But the combo is so powerful that, generally speaking, it's worth it, because once you get to a point where you've acquired overwhelming card advantage, like having 1 or 2 dead cards that just combo out really well is more acceptable, I guess, is my point. We go ahead and cast Factor Fiction here. Now, we get Electrolyze to face, down to 6, opponent up a card. I believe we end up taking the 2 pile, we take the 3 pile. The 2 pile may have been more correct here, because the 2 pile allows us to just get rid of this this Tamiyo. So we have to play a fetch here. That's all we have as far as mana goes. We draw into Detention Sphere. I am, at this point in time, I believe, building a deck for another friend of mine that was playing in a tribal event, and make a significant misplay. I play the Batterskull out. I don't play with Tamiyo a lot. I don't think the card is good enough for this format. However, I probably should have reread it. Tamiyo actually taps down the creature. It's not like... I thought it was just like a Johnny's ability, where it's just like, alright, if it's tapped, it stays tapped. So I figured I was in a good spot here, just playing out the skull, and absent-mindedly kind of pitched the game. I think we had pretty solid technical play in the early part of the game, but this was a pretty big whiff. The correct play here, I think, would have been to Detention Sphere the Tamiyo, and then leave available to ourselves Path to Exile. If we had done that, then we could Path to Exile, the Mishra's Factory. We're still at burn and still close to burn range here. Given the way it played out, it would have been Path to Exiling the token, but the opponent wouldn't have been able to cast it. So we sizably whiff here. We could have gotten rid of the Tamiyo and also gotten rid of the Elemental token and left the sword in play on its own, and then cast out Shackles on the following turn with the ability to steal the Mishra's Factory prior to equips. So we significantly screwed up here. I think we probably... I'm not saying we could have won this. I don't know what the last card is in their hand. If they had a bunch of burn, we could just lose. And we have to keep in mind, we're at a virtual 3 because the Barbarian Ring is active after 1 more card goes to the graveyard, which is not going to be hard to do on a blue-red deck. So I'm not saying we would have won, but we definitely could have played that one a lot better. So got distracted, played poorly. Game 3. So this is an interesting game. We have Hydroblast, which I think is great in this matchup. I think there's going to be like half his deck I'm going to be able to counter with it. Mostly the half that does damage. There you go. So he casts Gataxian Probe in response to Gataxian Probe by Hydroblast here, just in case he's playing Mental Misstep. It gives him one last look for it. This hand is dubious because it doesn't have white mana, and it doesn't really have a way to win yet. Personal Tutor can set that up, but obviously I need 2 white mana to utilize and treat the Angels, and I don't really have a sizable mana situation yet. Opponent Brainstorms here. Draw another island. I play the island down over the Flooded Strand, because at this point in time, I don't want my opponent to know any more than they need to. They use Gataxian Probe. They know I had 3 islands. I go for a remand on this, and I'm pretty happy to trade it with a Pyroblast here. I think that's a very good exchange for me, frankly. And I would have played it the same way, but I was very happy when I saw that. Intent here is to fetch basic planes, and then Enlightened Tutor for Search for his Kanta. So my opponent gets to a point where they start playing threats. Here we have a Grim Lavamancer, but I'm fine with that. I don't think the card is per se great against my deck. And at this point, they're either holding up counter magic or they're expecting to think twice on my end step. I go ahead and Enlighten Tutor here. I find Search for his Kanta because my thinking is this. My opponent's going to be able to, probably beat me down pretty hard, but Search for his Kanta is going to give me the ability to have late game potential and comeback potential against it. So I play it out here. I do it in my second main because I have mana drain, and I would much rather get the mana on my main one after an untap than I would in my second main after I've tapped down half my lands to play Search and, Personal Tutor, whatever. Have another error here. Again, I was kind of in between several games at this point in time, and we either clicked through or F6 or something happened on Personal Tutor we failed to find with it. It probably would have been Treasure Cruise at this point in time. Get decently lucky here, find a Snapcaster Mage, strong card. It allows me to remand again to get a little deeper in the deck, or we can just Hydroblast something if we want and still leave up the mana drain. We take 2 to the Brisket here, which I'm fine with. That's like I said, Pyromancer is a strong card, or I'm sorry, Lavamancer is a good card, but it's not. It's better when it's killing creatures than it is when it's like just blinking me from like 19 life. I do counter this. I think that may have been an error actually, because when it comes back, it'll essentially draw him 2 cards. I probably should have killed it in a time frame where the cards didn't matter as much, where I already had overwhelming advantage. Although it does allow me to set up flipping this. I ditched the Brainstorm, take 2 again to the Brisket down to 15. Draw an Oblivion Ring, which is okay. I actually take Dismiss here, or I'm sorry, Mana Leak here. Reason being, I have an Oblivion Ring now, and if my opponent resolves a Planeswalker, Mana Leak is going to be kind of dead against the first thing. So if he plays like a Chase the Mind Sculptor, let's say, what I would like to be able to do is cast Oblivion Ring on my turn, have that get countered by whatever his counterspell is, and then Mana Leak his counterspell. He draws into 4 cards, discarding 2, so he's up 2 cards total. Shoots us again. At this point in time, I determine it's probably best for me to cast the Snapcaster Mage out while he's tapped out, get rid of the Grim Lavamancer, and have a good blocker in place so I can get 2 activations of Search for His Kanta unmolested from attacks. We get very lucky and draw a Terminus here just to get rid of the 4/4. I go ahead and pass it. I'm going to leave up Counter Magic plus activation of Search. Here, I just go ahead and search. Now, as you can see, my concept or my theory became true. So Chase the Mind Sculptor's been played. My plan is to Oblivion Ring this thing as soon as I can, and then back it up with Mana Leak or Negate. Pardon. So Lighthouse Chronologist is a bad card. I'm not a fan of it, but in this board situation and against my deck, it's actually kind of spooky. So I play this weird sub-game where I want my opponent to tap down as low as I can make them tap down because I don't want them to actually, for lack of better terms, ultimate that thing or get it to 7+ counters. Once they do, then I'm in a lot of trouble. So I force them. I Mana Leak this spell, even though I don't really care if it resolves. I don't want them putting more counters on that thing because as soon as they're taking an extra turn, I'm probably losing the game. I go ahead and take Treasure Cruise out of this. That could have been wrong, but I can cast it right now and still leave up the Logic Knot, and I'm drawing into 3 cards, some of which have to be good. They're not great as it turns out. Maybe Jace would have been better. Opponent plays Anarchy, but by this point, there are 43 seconds remaining on the clock. I am lamenting now having Treasure Cruise. However, I'm going to force them to tap down on their turn, but they don't do it, which is odd to me, because I think if they get Jace the Mind Sculptor back, I'm in a bad spot. They do 2 damage to me, so they're burning through their cards. They got this thing up to 5 counters. I go for a Search for His Kanta here. Find Engineered Explosives, which is not a bad pickup because it's going to allow me to blow up their Fire Diamond, plus the Lighthouse Chronologist before it ultimates, and allows me to leave up Spell Snare. So, opponent plays Anticipate, looking for probably some burn or something. I counter it. They're on 1 card, have to pass it back, and I am pretty much... I think at this point, unless they Mise extremely well, and they've already burned off, their Firebolt. I guess I am in a virtual too, so any shock would probably kill me here. But the Firebolt I can actually Force Spike plus Complicate and then enable myself to get back into Search for His Kanta on the following turn. So I feel like, you look at this game, and the opponent did timeout, but I don't think we are losing this. I think we're actually winning it right now. Search for His Kanta very early off the Enlightened Tutor that happened, I think turn 2 or something like that. Ended up shaping and warping this game, 12 turns down the road, because in the control versus control matchup, you're going to have a lot of dead cards, right? Typically speaking, the opponent's burn is kind of dead because it takes so much of it just to kill me. But it's very efficient, but it doesn't really have a deep impact, and its economy... it's very efficient. Its economy is not very good. Whereas the sort of deck I'm playing is more value-based, i.e. stuff like Search for His Kanta. And here I think you kind of see that shine through. Our opponent has, probably slightly more dead cards than we do. Now, we certainly have some, but Search for Iskanta removes that deficiency of control decks because I'm capable of impulsing every turn in the late game, and certainly one of the top 4 cards will be good enough to put in my hand and actually shape or impact the game. So this is a card that I was on the fence about due to the meta, because I thought the meta was too aggressive to actually add this to a blue-white deck. However, I was dead wrong. I played it in this tournament and was just overwhelmingly happy with it every time I got to put it on the board. So I think in the early game, it allows you to filter draw, make land drops, and it's ramp in the mid game, and then late game it just turns into an advantage engine that is just overwhelming if it's not dealt with. So that was our first match. Ended up going 2-1. Game 2 against a White Weenie piloted by Fred Gadafano. I hope I'm saying that right, Fred. Well, Fred's playing this deck. So, White Weenie. I played Fred before, so I knew he was on White Weenie. We played yesterday a 5-game set. He leads off on a 1-drop Mother of Runes, which, fine by me. I have an Enlightened Tutor. This hand is a little dubious, but what this hand does do very well, one, it has Portent to kind of filter the top deck, because I really want spells right now, not lands. But Merchant Scroll allows me to get into Mystical Tutor, which allows me to get into Terminus. So if my opponent expands his board horizontally very rapidly, then I'll be able to kind of come back from behind very easily with this hand. I go ahead and find the Mystical Tutor here. I'm really not in a rush. I'm going to be a little greedy here. I like seeing Selfless Servant come out, because that means that we're putting that thing on the bottom of his deck, and then if I draw another Wrath, I have the ability to... I'm not worried about that card anymore. Unless he's playing fetch lands in there, he probably cannot shuffle it back up. Well, I guess Stoneforge Mystic would be another way to shuffle. I do go ahead and Mystical Tutor here for the Terminus. Draw to Terminus. Big surprise there. It's a miracle. Go ahead and deal with the team. Get a 3-for-1. Very good. Play out a tap land. Well, a shock land that I don't really feel like taking a shock from. And we have Remand available to us right now. I believe he plays a Figure of Destiny, which I'm fine with. I'm probably just going to cast out the Engineered Explosives and sit on it. Play on an island. Tap the Plains. Could leave up Cryptic Command here, but at the end step he goes to turn it into a 2-2 and then into a 4-4. And I opt just to blow the explosives, then tapping the 2 white lands. So if he plays Dust Bowl or Wasteland, I'm not going to get stuck off of casting Remand if I want to. Go ahead and pop it here. I don't want something random to protect it. I don't think there is anything that could stop that, but just in case. He's not playing blue, so he doesn't have Stifle or Disallow. Play out the Tundra. Wasteland, not great in this matchup. May actually even be overrated in this deck, but there's always a time when I want to use it, like for manlands. Manlands tend to be tough for this deck to deal with. All right, 1-drop. Definitely not remanding that. Probably not going to Cryptic Command that. I'm at 14 life. I've got time, and I've also got a Celestial Colonnade. Although my expectation is if my opponent attacks with this thing, they've got Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares. They have an instant speed way of dealing with my Celestial Colonnade, more than likely, because they're probably not going to 2-for-1 themselves to kill it. I don't like seeing this card. This card can just turn into a big mess very fast. So I do counter it and draw. I know I'm going to hit a land next turn. And there's the land. I play out the Wasteland here. I'm going to save the fetch, because if I draw a card like, Brainstorm or Chase the Mind Sculptor, then it's going to allow me to kind of filter my deck. I think opponent overtaps for this. Having a Micaeus on 5 is about as good as having him on 3. He's really a horizontal grow style card. He's a lot better with a horizontal grow style deck. There was a possibility that I wanted to just Wrath of God there, as opposed to throwing this thing out front. But I'm fine throwing it out front. It gets the card out of my opponent's hand, force him to show it to me. Also, another possibility, I just wanted to Mana Leak that and not counter the Micaeus. Just blow him up. All right, rest in peace. Utter dead draw there. Still not going to cast Wrath of God. I'll go to 6 before I'll cast Wrath of God on a single 1-drop. Opponent's got to show me something. Very lucky here. Go for a fetch. Finding, I believe, Prairie Stream, Personal Tutor for Entreat the Angels, and then decide to leave up Remand. Remand is kind of a combo here because it allows me to cast this on their turn, and ideally have a bunch of Hasted Angels, like 6 or so of them. I go ahead and remand this card, even though it does nothing really, like, as far as remand goes, but allows me to cast, 5 or 6 4/4 flyings out, which is strong. And we see the Council's Judgment. Yeah, we get Council's Judgment. That's fine. Like, that's not a big deal. It means I'm not going to kill this next turn, but I can still give them a very good beatdown. Draw Seachrome Coast, not a great draw. Opponent mises very well here and draws Spectral Procession, which is problematic because it can put us very low to on life. It can put us actually down to what? I guess it's down to 2. We attack with 2 of our angels. Jace Architect of Thought was a great draw because it basically turns the spirits off as far as attackers, and means the 2 that we left back can block very effectively against the 2 ground-based threats. Opponent wraps it up after looking at our board because we already have lethal in the air. One of these angels hitting is lethal. So, game 2. It's funny, this series of games, I don't think I ever won with Rip Helm. I have historically. Rip Helm is generally better against mid-range decks because you can afford to have a few more dead cards because the games are a little slower, and they generally have more bridging or enabling cards that are not as relevant against this deck. As opposed to like aggro, where like you want every card to matter. Like I generally take the Rip Helm combo out against aggro because it just tends to be pretty bad. So this hand was interesting in this game. I kept it mostly on the power of Brainstorm plus fetch. I believe I keep the top card and then a fetch before drawing the second card down. I'm not really worried about the Axe this game because I do have Detention Sphere. And the plan right now is that I will Detention Sphere the Axe because that thing will get very out of hand with the Precinct Captain. It is a pretty cool card, though. 2 is a lot to equip, though. It is kind of like Bone Splitter, but not quite, right? Alright, so we see a Palace Jailer. This is where the game kind of goes sideways. I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to lose. Like, typically speaking, these cards, if they resolve, are very difficult to beat. Blow up the board. My plan here is to try to get Shackles down, steal something, and then bounce whatever his next play is, so that I can get in there for a hit and steal this, and then just like keep them off of attacks. So cast out the Shackles here. Plan is to steal the Finks. Go ahead and steal it during begin combat phase. Shackles are now turned off. They do have a Sierra Avenger though. At this point in time, I opt to bounce the Sierra Avenger. Now, I am going to attack here because if they don't want to block, then I'm going to get the token. If they do block, then I'm going to get my Shackles freed up, acknowledging that they're going to get the Kitchen Finks back. So Jace will die here, but I feel like that's a noble sacrifice. I'm at 11 life, and I really need to get them off of the Monarchy. Great draw here in Moat. Now the plan is I'm going to make some 1/1s, and then I'm hoping they don't have like one of 3 cards to deal with this. They do, so it's like Banishing Light, Council's Judgment, or Oblivion Ring that they probably have to deal with the Elspeth directly. But now that Shackles are freed up, I'm able to steal their 2/2, get an attack. I figure one's going to get quicksanded, one will trade with Finks, and one will just get blocked by Herald and die, which is as good as it's going to get right now. Now the plan is to counter as much as I can and try to find a way to get through. They make a 1/1. I go ahead and counter their follow-up threat with the least efficient counterspell Absorb in my hand. And now I'm just kind of hoping that I can get to what I need here. Mana Drain's not quite what I need. I don't really need permission right now. I need a way to impact the board. So, well, it is a very powerful card. It's not what I'm really hoping for here. Opponent attempts to cast out Spear of Heliod. Then cast out Elite Inquisitor, which I'm fine with. I get very, very lucky here and draw into a Mystic Confluence, bounce my opponent's 2 threats, draw a card, and get in there for 2, which is great because it puts me back up to 18 for 1 and allows me to steal the Monarchy. So what I've been hoping to do is something like this, and now when my opponent plays on a bunch of random, like, nonsense weenie threats, I'm going to be able to cast a Moat and keep them from winning, essentially. So I do have Moat in hand, and I have mana drained the Spirit of the Labyrinth. Spirit of the Labyrinth is actually good in this situation for my opponent because it keeps me from being able to utilize the Monarchy effectively. So I go ahead and play out Moat. Plan is I'll probably cycle Miscalc sometime here soon. I believe they cast Return to Ranks to convoke Expel. This is actually pretty bad for us because they get back Phyrexian Revoker plus Spirit of the Labyrinth, all of which are not great things for us specifically. So they have a bunch of bigger ground creatures that really cannot get through to attack me here. So we know they have a flyer in hand. The rest of their hand is kind of an unknown to us. Herald of Anafenza, not a huge fan of this card. Now, Seer Avenger, I don't just go for the snap spell snare. I want to look first, so I can draw on their turn. I can draw 1 card a turn. So I have to cycle on their turn because I'm already going to draw during my draw step. I get very lucky and find Mystical Tutor, which is going to transmute into a whole crap ton of angels. I play very cautiously here. It's twofold. I don't want to get manatized, so I do leave a mana up. I don't commit to 7 angels here. I commit to, I believe, 6. And the other half is I get to feign counter magic here as well. And the other piece to it is I don't ever want to not have Spell Snare up. Like, for instance, if I go for 7 there and they cast Disenchant on my Moat, like, I'm just dead. Like, I'm dead. Like, DED. Just donezo, right? The Banisher Priest, one of the things, that's fine. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much because, you know, they spent 1 card for 1/6 of a card. I'm okay with that. I get ready to cast Opt on my turn, and then I stop myself and say, hey, dummy, stop trying to do that. You need to do it on their turn because Spirit of Labyrinth, of course. Bang in there for almost all of their life. They're at 2. Of course, I draw 0 cards off the Monarchy token. They draw pretty well here and draw a Sword of Light and Shadow. I bottom an Academy Runes, find a Mana Leak. No, I'm sorry, Complicate. I do complicate this because I don't want them to recast the Kitchen Finks afterwards. Although, I don't even think that's that relevant. It would put them in supposed to 5 to 7, which would still be lethal damage for my Air Force here. I go ahead and take the damage. They receive the Monarchy back, but they will not draw because Spirit of the Labyrinth is a unilateral effect, and they perish. So, that was that game set. The last game set was also against White Weenie. We were slated to play against Sensei Rob, but unfortunately he had to go due to family engagement. And that probably would have been a more interesting match because it was a rug deck that he was playing. So some blue on blue, but probably a little more aggressive than my deck, a little more active. I was playing against Goldenlin here, who again is on White Weenie. Very popular deck. That first hand had 1 land that was white and a Mystical Tutor. So no go on keeping there. I only have a 1-lander, but I do scry a land to the top, which means I can get Search for Azcanta online. The way sequencing will work with this hand is I'll play Search first because I think it's going to be more valuable and less likely to be removed. I'm happy to see them play Figure of Destiny. Figure of Destiny is a very strong card, but in the early turns, it can actually interfere with their mana development because they have to invest additional mana into it as opposed to playing more creatures out, which essentially gives me more time. They play a Sigiled Paladin, gives Exalted has Exalted, and gives a +1/+1 to Figure of Destiny. We're looking for lands here. I do keep this Path to Exile, hoping to Mize a land off the top. I miss Ditch Terminus because it's just really bad here. I do cast an Oblivion Ring because I failed to find land, and I want to keep their board as small as possible. I get beat up for 3 again here, down to 13. That's fine. They play on a Gold Meadow Harrier, which is not great for us because my Battered Skull is kind of vulnerable to that style of that threat or that ability. Draw to Remand, ditch the Council's Judgment because I'm short on white mana at this point, and this will allow me to cast both Remand and Path to Exile on my opponent's turn. I do get rid of the Figure of Destiny. This may have been wrong. I probably should have just looked to get rid of the Gold Meadow Harrier. I do remand this. This is, again, another great card against Batterskull because it can just block it all day long if my opponent so desires. I draw to disallow here. Not bad. Ditch Island, I believe. Flip Jace. And actually recast Path to Exile. Opponent resolves, Honor the Peer, which means Jace is going to die. Not great, but what can you do? I'm not going to counter that. I'm going to counter the threat here because this threat actually stymies the Batterskull on the offense. I do keep Gideon Jura. I figure this is going to buy me some more time, and anything that attacks I can just blow up with Gideon. Now, I get a little unfortunate here. I believe my opponent plays down Sublime Archangel plus Mother of Runes and bangs my Gideon down to 4 or 5. Gideon's going to die next turn. I go ahead and plus him, and my play is to look with Search. I kind of find a worthless card here, Exclude. It's not good in this position. Again, Counter Magic, bad when you are behind. So what I was hoping to find was some sort of Wrath effect. I am not lucky enough to do so, but I have a little more time here. I go ahead and look with Search, find Detention Sphere. I try to next level my opponent, and it actually works. I play this out and target the Sublime Archangel as opposed to tapping his Mother of Runes. I believe out of fear of Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares, he just lets it go, which is good by me because that gives me a lot more time. If he had another creature card and attacks with the Sublime Archangel, I'm almost dead that turn. Aven Mindcensor comes out. I was already F6 at that point. I should have fetched in response. Now, if I was not dead before, I'm quite dead now. I don't find anything worthwhile here, and I just go ahead and scoop the game. I actually shuffled and redrew the Merchant Scroll. It was kind of funny. So, game 2. I think we got a little unlucky on our search for his Kanta pulls there. But there's not much you can do. I mean, if that happens, it happens. But seeing 8 cards, I feel like we probably weren't as much of a dog as it seemed there. I think it just underperformed a little bit, but I think that's variance. I don't think that's the card. The card really did a lot of great work for me in pretty much every at least one game of every match this evening. So get hit by the 1-2. The 1-2's fine with me. Like, I'm just going to sit here and just wait for things to be cast, then just push them back to the opponent's hand. Remand, yep. Draw to Cryptic, better than drawing it next turn. I get lucky this next turn and actually hit a fetch land, which is great. It means I can leave up Impulse plus Path to Exile here. Although Path to Exile on Thraben Inspector seems like horrendous value. All right, we see a White Shield Crusader. I go ahead at this point and Impulse. I'm not going to complicate that. I kind of want to try to eke every bit of value I can out of my cards, and I prefer to complicate something that I can actually cycle on as well. So we have a tapped land here. That's what we impulsed for. It was the only land available. Bone Splitter, okay. Get very lucky here and draw into another Wrath or to a Wrath. Fetch for, I believe, Tundra to get double white mana just in case we draw a Moat or another Wrath effect that we may need later on down the road. Cast out the Toxic Deluge, killing everything. And tell our opponent, hey, just got a 2-for-1, go ahead and do your worst. They've obviously run out of land. Spectral Possession happens. I draw Supreme Verdict, which is pretty cool, but I'm not going to blow it right now. I want to get more cards than just the one card. Silverblade Paladin is a card I could have countered with Cryptic Command. What I opt to do instead is just draw and then bounce their extra card. So my game plan is to run them out of cards, and that is a way they can draw into cards. I'm on a fast deck, so that extra card is actually more valuable to me than the onboard Silverblade Paladin that I can deal with, well, in this case, Terminus, but Supreme Verdict before. Go ahead and Terminus because this allows me to also either cast Jace or leave up Complicate plus Path to Exile. I believe here I keep the land and put the other 2 cards on top just in case there's some way they can disrupt my hand, which there shouldn't be in white. Unless they're Splash Black or something. Suture Priest is fine by me. Griff's Boon. So this is funny to me. They spend all their mana and a card putting Griff's Boon on this thing. I just bounce it because that's card advantage. I mean, yeah, obviously he can recast the Griff's Boon, but that's for 4 mana in a white weenie deck. That's a lot of mana to commit to just 2 power or 1 power plus flying. I wasn't going to Path to Exile to put him up on mana, though. See Mother of Runes. I'm fine with Mother of Runes. It's not really that big of a deal because I have Supreme Verdict in hand. Mother of Runes comes on down, and if he opts to turn that sideways, I'll definitely blow it up with Path to Exile. think it's very rare that you want to turn Mother of Runes sideways. Here we're going for Sphinx's Revelation for, I believe, 4 or 5. 5, yeah. Which is strong. Some people would say that's very strong. Find infinite cards. Not really a better way to win the game yet, but I'm actually very happy to find engineered explosives, and I'll pop it here. I go ahead and fetch, I believe, finding a basic planes. Use the basic planes to cast the engineered explosives, and then just blow it up right now. I could have done that on like their main one, but I'm not going to let them equip the Mother and kill my Jace or beat it down. I go ahead and personal tutor here, finding Entreat the Angels, and expect that next turn I will be able to quite handily win. They do nothing. I draw the Entreat and cast it for, what, 7? A lot. I don't play around Mana Tide there, because if they do counter it, I'm not in that big of a bad of shape. So they kill 2 of them with 2 cards, so they spent 2 cards for, 2/6 or 1/3 of a card. I am fine with that. That's a very fair exchange rate for me. Play Fiend Hunter. I actually just counter this because I would prefer just to have, I don't know. I just counter it just because I can. The opponent's not doing anything else, really. And we beat them down for lethal in the air with Entreat the Angels. Someone once said that they thought Entreat the Angels would be a bad win con in Hunter card, just due to the speed. And that it would be inconsistent, hard to find. I have actually found that to be extremely untrue. The card has been an overperformer for me as far as win cons go. All right, so this hand is interesting. It's actually bad, but I keep it because I figure if they're slow whatsoever, eventually I'm going to be able to draw into enough white mana to cast Wrath of God. I'll be able to kind of catch back up. Enlightened Tutor is also not bad because it's going to allow me to, at some point, probably get Shackles. I think Shackles is probably the right answer in this matchup over Search for Iskanta, especially given this board state. So we see a Kitchen Sphinx, cast this for Shackles at this point, and have all plans to cast out the Shackles next turn and protect ourselves from Mishra's Factory. Obviously, at this point, the Kitchen Sphinx is going to take 2 more land drops, 2 more island land drops to take away. Alright, opponent attacks us for 6, which is a beatdown, but then Winter Orb comes down. Winter Orb is generally very good against this deck, but I kind of have a good game plan against it. I'm going to eventually Detention Sphere it, which is a little brutal because it means my opponent will get to play their cards first, but what are you going to do? I don't go for it here. I actually want to leave up the Vidalcan Shackles. Glad I do because they would have been stopped regardless. The cool thing about this play, and the reason I really wanted that Kitchen Sphinx, is because I really want to get into combat with my opponent and trade one half of it. Now, it will go back to my opponent. The other half of the Kitchen Sphinx will. However, that also means when I resolve my Wrath, I can be free of all threats as well. Not have to worry about one half of Sphinx. I go ahead and opt here, put to bottom, find Negate, which is not a horrible pickup. Still kind of digging for white mana so I can cast this Wrath at some point. But the way my opponent is developing their board, my assumption is what they're looking to do is try to go for an Alpha Strike on the following turn. So I actually get Mazavith on line first, so I can feign that I don't have a Wrath effect. And they go for the Gusto here and just start casting everything they have out. Which is great by me. I have no problems with this. I actually do just negate this thing. I don't feel like taking more incremental damage from nowhere. Now, this is great because I get to block the Mishra's Factory, which means that on my following turn, when I get to cast Wrath of God, the board will be 100% free of threats, and there will be nothing on it. And I get to go into their turn with an untapped Shackles, which is a good deal. So, Wrath effect. Opponent's on 0 cards, finds a mana source. Okay. I'm not really worried about their top deck at this point. I don't think they can get me down from 8. I just resolved the Batter Skull so I can start going aggressive, as opposed to leaving up the Mystic Confluence, which I expect is likely just to bounce something or to draw me a bunch of cards. Get an attack in, do 6, down to 22, back up to 12 for us, which is great. Ajani, I do counter this. So I counter this with one part of the 3 parts of Mystic Confluence and draw 2 cards. Find Search for His Content Spell Pierce, I believe. Yeah. Memory is serving me well so far. Go ahead and steal this thing because 6 is better than 4. Mana Drain is actually good here, so at this point what I want to do is just get as much permission as I can because they're fighting off the top of their deck, and I just want answers to whatever may come. So if they Mize well, I just want to be able to counter it. Aven Mind Sensor, I do fetch properly this time as opposed to the last matchup where I just F6 through it. Find a basic again, and I let this resolve. This does not scare me. Put the island in my graveyard, flip to search for his Kanta, and now pretty much have this game completely locked up, I think. Go ahead and search here. Find Counterspell over Moat and Serum Visions in a land. Don't really want any of that other stuff. I just, like I said, I want Counter Magic here to stop all the big bad stuff that's happening. I go ahead and absorb this just because I can, and I'd prefer not to have more blockers on my opponent's side. They go ahead and attach the Griff's Boon and get in for 4. Fairly aggressive. I guess they kind of have to because I could equip the Batterskull to the Sultari Priest anyways, and they won't be able to block it. I really don't want to use Swords to Plowshares. I'd prefer just to win next turn. At this point, I believe they cast, the Council's Judgment. I counter this and bounce the Aven Mind Sensor, giving them 0 cards to block with. Knowing Aven Mind Sensor is the last card in their hand, we have a pretty deterministic win here. And our opponent concedes it right before I think we swing for lethal, or maybe they'll allow us to kill them. Anyway, guys, that was the 100-card Singleton event for today, 20 January 2018, or event 4.15. Had a great time playing blue-white control. Very sweet deck. And if Moto continues to work, we'll go back to the deck picks. There we go. So, here's the deck again. Combo control. A little more challenging to play. I would not say extremely hard. The toughest part about playing control is generally turns 1 through 4. If you get through 1 through 4 and you've established an open board with your opponent, you're probably winning. It probably doesn't take that much skill to win from that point. But I think sequencing and understanding of hidden information between turns 1 through 4 is probably the most crucial aspect of playing this deck, and is where most of the fun comes in it for me. After you've established control, the games kind of become monotonous because you have so many answers in the form of permission that you can basically just lock your opponent out just through sheer card volume. But, it can also be a challenge sometimes to find a win con, too. I mean, sometimes you're just trying to win with a Gideon Jura, or an Elspeth. Sometimes you just, find what you need and you entreat the Angels. The deck is certainly designed to primarily win off entreat because it's just so quick. If you set it up right, it's a one-shot kill. So I tend to be pretty big fan of the deck. I was never a fan of Legacy Miracles. I thought the deck was not only monotonous, but just tedious to play online, and also just kind of nonsensical. Like I never really had fun playing it with it or against it. But I haven't played this card in any other deck other than Miracles, Legacy Miracles, other than this deck as well. And this deck has certainly given me a much greater appreciation of Entreat because the card is just bonkers. And really just a pleasure to play. So I hope you guys enjoyed this very short video series on a recap of gameplay from CSM or Chainsaw Massacre 100-card Singleton event 4.15, and I hope to see you guys next week. Please join in the event. Very fun event. The decks are a little more pricey, but like you can see from my sideboard right here, even a deck that's probably a little more expensive like this one can die to some very simple things like red deck wins. Thus the reason that over half of our sideboard is committed to stopping that deck. All right, guys, have a great night and great week. I'll see you next time.